With extracts from his own diary tapes and other recordings, Tony Benn recalls the Labour Party's bitter internal upheavals in the early 1980s.
After our defeat in 1979, many members of the Labour Party were angry that a Labour Prime Minister and Cabinet often seemed to ignore or reverse the policies on which they'd been elected. This is why there was such a huge campaign to make Labour MPs more accountable to the membership by regular reselection and the election of the leader and deputy leader by the whole movement in an electoral college. I had decided before the general election that whether we won or lost, I would return to the backbenches so as to be free to support that campaign. And when we did lose, I explained my reasons to my old cabinet colleagues. Sunday, the 13th of May, 1979, Carol and I went over to join Judith Hart and our old group for dinner. And we sat and talked at dinner and then went round and sat together. And Michael Foot pointed to the chair next to him and sat. "Now, why did you decide not to run for the shadow cabinet?" Well, I said, "You know my position. I wasn't really in sympathy with the last government's policy. I stuck it out till the election. And then when Jim said there will be shadow cabinet collective responsibility, that was the final straw that I had decided before that. I want to be on the back bench. There's nothing more to it than that." Well, then he absolutely turned on me. "Well, what do you want to say to the backbenchers?" So I said, "Well, I want to talk of the parliamentary party, about the democratisation of the parliamentary party, getting rid of patronage, putting the parliamentary party back into a control of its own affairs. I said the left can never prosper except by democracy. It's the only way it can prosper." And Michael blew his top and said, "Oh, we don't want to put the parliamentary party back in charge. That was the trouble during the overnight period. That was caused the trouble. Can't have that." And I said, "I'm also in favour of the election of the whole shadow cabinet and the cabinet when we're off. That's a recipe for keeping the party in the wilderness for 20 years. Well, to cut a long story short, in the end, the whole dinner had been arranged for us all to agree that Michael should stand as deputy leader. And I think Michael felt that my not standing for the shadow cabinet had sort of undermined his position. And he was so angry. And I cannot avoid getting involved in these terribly combative discussions. I regret it every time. And they're not the left at all. They're a little protected group of modest dissenters tolerated by the right so long as they don't interfere with right-wing policies. And they call that the left. But I really do think we've got to go right back and build this thing up from the bottom. I don't think those people there last night had any idea what the Labour Party was about anymore. It was just a very convenient mechanism that made them ministers from time to time, and they called that socialism. I really do think it's gone much, much further than I thought. And when you get what used to be called the left of the Labour Party so far to the right, then it may mean there just is no support in the country for these views. You've just got to fight as best you can and see what happens. Because I haven't altered. I haven't become more left-wing, I don't think. Well, I have, of course, over the last 10 years, but I think the country's moved very sharply to the right. The leadership was strongly opposed to these reforms, but the pressure to implement them grew strongly at successive Labour conferences. Despite the conventional view that it was the left which was splitting the party, the split, when it did come, came from the right, led by Bill Rogers, David Owen and Shirley Williams, who were by then totally out of sympathy with the party, its policy, and the democratic reforms that we were engaged in implementing.
Many delegates will wonder whether this conference will be Mr. Callaghan's last as Labour leader. That is why the continuing argument about how the leader is chosen matters. Labour's left, with Mr. Benn prominent, want the whole party to have a bigger say in electing the leader and writing the Election Manifesto. And they don't look like giving up if they're defeated this year.
Labour's left and right fire their opening salvos as the party conference begins in Blackpool. There, the so-called Gang of Three, William Rogers, David Owen and Shirley Williams, attacked what they see as the totally undemocratic direction the Labour Party is taking.
The time has come when you'd better stick your heads up, and you'd better come over the parapet, and you'd better start fighting, because if you don't start fighting, you won't have a Labour Party any longer that's worthy of the name.
Mrs. Shirley Williams speaking outside the conference today and saying in terms which will stun some party members and infuriate others, things which have up to now been left firmly unsaid. A speech totally uncompromising, which will become part of Labour's history.
Monday, the 26th of January, 1981. I went and bought all the papers today, and it was mass coverage of the Labour Party. The Council for Social Democracy, set up by Roy Jenkins, Shirley Williams, David Owen and Bill Rogers, was splashed all over the front page with the so-called Limehouse Declaration and so on. And well, it was a turning point in a way, because from now on the Labour Party is going to be outside the pale of normal treatment. It'll be treated as if it was in some way illegitimate. And the big news is that the Council for Social Democracy have got 13 members now, MPs, who are supporting them, and the media are giving absolutely massive coverage. But I suppose really I can't complain, because if it does look as if there is going to be a new political party, that is important news. But the left are so far holding their hand, and I think that is right. I don't think it's sensible for us to attack them at the moment. Let them come out with their own policy, and then we've got to raise the question of Tom Bradley and Shirley Williams on the National Executive, and the existence of Bill Rogers on the Shadow Cabinet, actually planning a new political party while remaining a part of the upper leadership of the party. I mean, that is absolutely wrong.
The launch of the SDP, which finally did split the party, came 2 months later with mass media support, and ultimately 10% of all Labour MPs deserted Labour and joined the SDP. Dennis Healey, who was then the deputy leader, was strongly opposed to the democratic reforms himself and also to key elements in Labour's policy, and the left decided to challenge him by using the new electoral college, and I accepted nomination. The new leader, Michael Foot, whom I'd actually voted for, tried to dissuade me, and when I announced my candidature, the media were universally hostile. I was held up for a few weeks because I had a viral infection that took me to hospital in June, but the campaign continued right up to conference.
Thursday, the 2nd of April, 1981. It's been a very interesting day. The media reaction has been exactly as I expected, and tomorrow it'll be even more so. Completely hysterical, just as they were at the time of the Common Market referendum. But this time it's a 6 months campaign, and that is going to blow itself out. Michael Foot's statement that I shouldn't have done it and asking me to withdraw is, of course, the new factor, so it looks as if I'm opposing my leader.
On defence, the common market and the economy, Dennis Healey is far removed from both Tony Benn and Michael Foot. With his own policies so out of favour, Healey confines himself to generalities and the odd joke. Though Tony Benn showed increasingly obvious signs of illness as he campaigned round the country, his message was unmistakably clear: that Labour's leaders in Parliament have in the past and will in the future betray the wishes of the rank and file unless they're made directly accountable. Fleet Street offered £500 for a picture of Benn in his pyjamas, but photographers disguised with white coats and stethoscopes failed to deliver.
What it has done, of course, is to force people to make choices. That's what's called polarisation, divisiveness and all the rest, but it's true. You can't go on forever and ever pretending you're a socialist party when you're not, pretending you'll do something when you're not, confining yourself to attacks on the Tories when that's not enough. People want to know what the Labour Party will do. And I think this process is absolutely long overdue. It's like the Labour Party having a Turkish bath, and the sweat and the heat and the discomfort is very obvious. And I'm sure Dennis will win. I will put that on the record now, because the party never sacks anybody. And why should it sack its deputy leader? Particularly as many people think that he should have been the leader. So I think Dennis will win, but I think there will be a sizable body of opinion which can't be entirely ignored or neglected. I think that is really so.
The election itself took place at the Brighton Conference in September, and the result turned on crucial abstentions by MPs in the Tribune group, encouraged by Neil Kinnock, and of course the votes of those Labour MPs who, having voted for Dennis Healey, promptly left the party and then themselves joined the SDP.
Sunday, the 27th of September 1981. When we went over to the conference hall, and I might add that by then the press were quite hysterical, the media were walking backwards in front of us, people were cheering and shouting, and we went in and I got my ballot papers, and I was prepared for a massive defeat and was feeling pretty gloomy, to be honest. I was sitting on the platform. I tried to look as cheerful as I could, and the conference began with the usual address by the mayor. Anyway, there was the debate on South Africa. Then I got 3 separate messages that I'd won. Doug Hoyle even congratulated me. I'd won by 0.9%, I'd won by 0.5%, I'd won again, and I kept going off the platform and getting these messages. And then finally, after the address by the fraternal delegate, the former Prime Minister of Norway, the result was announced.
The hall was packed with delegates eager to play their role in this historic election of Labour's deputy leader. For both Mr. Healy and Mr. Benn, this was to be the climax of 6 months of intense, often bitter struggle. And so the race remained neck and neck right up to the winning post.
Tony Benn, 49.574. Dennis Healy, 50.426.
Less than 1% in it, Mr. Healy carries on as Labour's deputy leader with only a hair's breadth majority. And that result demonstrates only too clearly the split right down the middle of the Labour Party.
We walked with a barrage of press and masses of cheering and shoving and pushing and so on back to the hotel, where people cheered all the way and cheered in the hotel lobby. We went up the stairs together and they cheered all the way up the stairs. And then we came out, declining to comment any further to the Panorama people or anybody else, and walked to the fish and chip shop where we had a meal 2 years ago. And the media came in there, and the television and everybody, and we sat and talked. Then we came back to the hotel and slowly debriefed ourselves. And Tony Banks looked in, and Chris Mullin was there, and it was just a lovely evening. And of course it has been an absolutely staggering result, with all the media against us, with the most violent attacks by the shadow cabinet, with the full intervention of Michael Foot, with the abstention of 7M Tribune Group MPs, who actually, in the event, turned out to be the people who carried the day. We got to within 0.8% of victory, and it was the best possible result, because if I'd won by 0.8%, people would have shouted cheat. But Healy can't shout cheat because he won. But it only requires 4 or possibly 6 more Labour MPs to join the Social Democrats for Healy's majority to disappear. And then he will hold the post but not have the authority. And I mean, it is the most tremendous result. So Carol went to bed. She's been an absolute standby throughout the whole of this. And she said to me, "You've got popularity without power." And it was a shrewd comment on perhaps on me personally, but at the same time it was a terrific result. Nobody can doubt for a moment that we've done brilliantly. And so about 1 o'clock in the morning, sitting in the bathroom so as not to disturb her, I bring to the end the report on the Electoral College, the first Electoral College ever held to allow the members of the party to vote for the deputy leadership of the Labour Party. And it's been a historic campaign, and I must confess, far, far more successful than I could have possibly dreamed of at the very beginning. So that is the end of Sunday, September the 27th, 1981.
These campaigns were really all about socialism and democracy. They've always been on the agenda of the Labour Party, and they're back on the agenda as the party considers the direction in which it wishes to move as we approach the next century.